You have exactly 1 week to bring me half of whatever is in that safe, or the only key I own goes into a lake. That is what my father's third wife said to me at his funeral, before the flowers had even wilted. My father was 3 days in the ground. I had not eaten in 2 days. And this woman I had met exactly one time in my entire life, stood in my father's driveway in a black dress that still had the tags cut off of it, and she told me she owned the only key to a safe I did not even know existed. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I am not a greedy person. I never asked my father for money while he was alive. But when a stranger threatens you over your own father's secrets, something in you goes very, very quiet and very, very cold. And that quiet, cold place is exactly where this story begins. My name is Dana. I am 38 years old, and until 4 months ago, I thought I knew everything worth knowing about my father, Warwick. He was 72 when he passed. He built a modest but steady electrical contracting business from nothing. The kind of man who fixed his own gutters until he was 69 and only stopped because his knees gave out, not because he wanted to. My mother, his first wife, passed away when I was 19. I was his only child. For years, it was just the two of us, and I liked it that way. I drove 2 hours every other Sunday to bring him groceries and sit with him while he watched golf he didn't even like. He had a second marriage in his 50s, brief, quiet, ended without much drama, no children from it. So when I say I thought I knew him, I mean I thought I had seen every version of him there was to see. A private man, a careful man, a man who kept his bank statements in a shoebox and his opinions mostly to himself. 2 years ago, at 70 years old, my father remarried. Her name was Odalis. She was 51. I met her exactly once, at a small courthouse ceremony my father called at the last minute, almost like he didn't want me there in time to talk him out of it. I remember shaking her hand. I remember her nails were long and painted the color of dried blood, and her smile did not reach her eyes. I remember thinking, this will not last. I was wrong. It lasted until the day he died, sitting in his recliner, in the house I grew up in, a house that, as of 2 years ago, was legally half hers. The trouble didn't start with the safe. It started 3 days after the funeral, with a phone call from a lawyer I had never heard of, a man named Preston Cale, who informed me, in a very careful, rehearsed voice, that my father's estate included a fireproof safe bolted into the floor of his home office, and that the safe required a physical key that had never been duplicated, filed, or registered anywhere. Only one key existed, and according to Mr. Cale, that key was currently in the possession of Odalis, my father's widow. I asked the obvious question, why would my father set it up that way? Why would a careful, methodical man leave the only key to something important in the hands of a woman he had known for less than 3 years, and tell his own daughter nothing? Mr. Cale said he couldn't speculate. He said my father had come to him privately, 8 months before he died, to change the paperwork on the safe specifically, separate from the will, separate from everything else. That detail sat wrong with me immediately. My father did nothing halfway and nothing without a reason. If he separated that safe from the rest of the estate on purpose, he wanted something protected, or someone controlled. I just didn't know which yet. I called Odalis directly. She answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting for it. I asked her, politely, if we could arrange a time to open the safe together, as family. She laughed. Not a mean laugh. A tired one, like she'd rehearsed this moment for months. Family? She repeated back to me. Honey, I was his wife for 2 years. You're his daughter from a marriage that ended before I ever met him. We are not the same kind of family. Then she told me the terms. 50% of whatever the safe contained, wired to an account of her choosing, before she would even discuss handing over the key. I told her that wasn't how inheritance worked, that a safe wasn't hers to negotiate. She said, almost sweetly, then I guess it stays locked forever, doesn't it? I tried to do this the right way. I really did. I went to Preston Cale's office with the marriage certificate, the property deed, everything I could find, and I asked him plainly, is there any legal way to compel her to open the safe or surrender the key? He sighed the sigh of a man who has given this exact answer to 100 grieving children before me. Technically, he said, the safe and its contents were not explicitly listed in the will, meaning ownership was ambiguous, and ambiguous meant expensive lawyers and years in probate court just to force one lock open. He suggested, gently, that it might be easier to simply negotiate with her. Easier for who? I wanted to ask. I called my father's 2 remaining siblings, my Aunt Ruth and my Uncle Desmond, hoping for backup, hoping someone would be as outraged as I was. Instead, I got Desmond telling me, Dana, honey, maybe your dad wanted her to have it. Maybe this is exactly what he intended, and you're just having a hard time accepting he moved on. Ruth was worse. Ruth actually said, you've always been a little possessive of your father, you know. Maybe it's time to let someone else in. I sat in my car in the parking lot of that lawyer's office, and I cried, not because I was sad anymore, but because I was being told, by my own blood, that wanting to know my father's secrets made me the greedy one. Odalise had somehow, in 2 years, convinced an entire family that grief made me unreasonable, and love made her a victim. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. I started to wonder if maybe they were right. 3 weeks after the funeral, Odalise invited me to the house, my father's house, to sort out logistics, in her words. I should have known better. When I arrived, there were moving boxes already stacked in the hallway, most of them labeled in her handwriting, not mine, not his. She'd already started dividing his tools, his old service awards, things that meant nothing to her and everything to me, into piles marked keep and donate. I found my father's reading glasses, the ones with a tape on the hinge because he refused to buy new ones, sitting in a donate box next to a half-empty bottle of his cologne. She caught me holding them and said, without even looking up from her clipboard, you can keep those if they mean that much to you. I really don't need the clutter. Clutter. My father's whole existence. Clutter to be managed. Then she walked me past the locked office door, tapped it twice like she was tapping a vending machine, and said, by the way, I found something interesting in there last week. A little notebook. Turns out your dad wrote quite a bit before he died. About all of us. She smiled that same smile from the courthouse. I haven't decided what to do with it yet. She was telling me, without telling me, that there was more inside that safe than money. And she was letting me know she had already read whatever it was, and I hadn't. That night I drove home and sat in my kitchen with the reading glasses in my hands until 2 in the morning, and I made a decision. I was done asking nicely. Here is the part of the story where I have to tell you something that changes everything, because if I don't, none of what comes next will make sense. 2 weeks before he died, my father called me. Not a text, an actual phone call, which he almost never did, because he said he didn't trust his own voice not to shake anymore. He told me he'd been having chest pains he hadn't told his doctor about yet. He told me he loved me, which he'd said maybe 5 times in my whole life. And then he said something strange, something I filed away and didn't think about again until that moment in the hallway with the reading glasses. He said, if anything happens to me, and there's trouble about that safe, I need you to remember one thing. I never trusted her with the money. I trusted her with a test. I asked him what that meant. He just said, you'll know when you see it, and changed the subject to golf. I thought it was the medication talking. I thought grief was making me remember things wrong. But standing in that hallway, hearing Odalis casually mention a notebook that talked about all of us, I understood. My father hadn't been careless when he separated that safe from his will. He had built a trap, and Odalise had walked directly into it, believing the whole time that she was the one holding all the power. The escalating cruelty, the 50% demand, the moving boxes, the mockery about clutter, none of it was an accident on his part. It was a test he designed before he died, to see exactly who she would become the moment he could no longer watch her. I stopped negotiating that night. I stopped calling lawyers about probate technicalities, and I started calling locksmiths, safe manufacturers, anyone who could tell me if a fireproof floor safe from that specific brand had an emergency override, something my father, careful as he was, might have arranged as a backup without telling anyone but me, indirectly, in that phone call. On the 4th call, a locksmith named Foster told me something that made my hands shake. That particular model had a registered secondary access code on file with the manufacturer, releasable only to a person listed as an emergency contact on the original purchase paperwork. He asked for the serial number. I didn't have it, but I remembered my father's storage unit, the one he'd kept since before I was born, full of receipts he never threw away because he didn't trust banks to keep records forever. I drove there that same night. 2 hours of dust and old paperwork later, I found the original safe purchase receipt from 11 years earlier. Listed as the sole emergency contact, handwritten in my father's own uneven print. My name, not O'Dallas's, mine. 11 years before he ever met her. My father hadn't rewritten that paperwork after the wedding. He'd left it exactly as it was, on purpose, and let her believe the physical key was the only way in. I called Foster back the next morning and scheduled an appointment to have that code released to me, legally, in my own name. No permission from O'Dallas required. I decided I wasn't going to open it quietly at home. I was going to open it in front of everyone who had spent the last month calling me possessive, unreasonable, and greedy. I asked Preston Cale to schedule the official reading of remaining estate matters at his office, and I made sure Ruth, Desmond, and O'Dallas were all invited. O'Dallas, of course, assumed this was her moment to finally negotiate her 50% in front of witnesses who would pressure me to fold. The morning of the meeting, O'Dallas walked into that conference room wearing the same funeral black dress, tags long gone now, and she set the physical safe key down on the table like a queen laying down a crown, already savoring what she thought was a win. "I assume you're finally ready to be reasonable," she said, glancing at Ruth and Desmond like she expected applause. I didn't answer her. I nodded to Foster, who I had waiting outside, and he came in with a small tablet device linked to the manufacturer's remote release system. He entered the code. From the next room, on video call, my father's office safe unlocked itself, remotely, without her key ever touching the lock. O'Dallas's face changed in a way I will remember until I die. On the tablet screen, we watched the safe door swing open. Inside, bank documents showing my father had quietly moved 80% of his liquid assets into an irrevocable trust in my name, dated 2 months after his wedding to O'Dallas, not before it, meaning he made that decision fully aware of who she was. And beside the documents, a handwritten notebook. Preston read it aloud, because I asked him to, because I wanted witnesses, not just proof. My father had written, in his own uneven print, that he married O'Dallas because he was lonely and did not want to die in an empty house. And he knew, going in, that she loved his money more than she loved him, and he had decided that was a trade he was willing to make for companionship, as long as she never touched what was meant for his daughter. The notebook also said something about her that surprised even me. He wrote that he believed O'Dallas herself had been left with nothing after 2 previous marriages to men who used her the same way she now intended to use him, and that he pitied her more than he resented her, but pity was not the same as trust. Then I looked directly at O'Dallas, at Ruth, at Desmond, and I said the only line I'd rehearsed the whole drive over. "You wanted 50% of a locked box. Turns out you never held the key to anything that mattered." O'Dallas didn't scream. She didn't cry. She picked up her purse, looked at the key still sitting uselessly on the table, and walked out without a word, because there was nothing left to negotiate. In the end, O'Dallas kept the house, half of it legally hers by marriage, and I did not fight her for it, because my father, in his own strange, careful way, had already made sure the things that mattered most, the trust, the truth, the notebook, were mine. Ruth called me 2 days later to apologize, quietly admitting O'Dallas had always known exactly what to say to make outsiders take her side. Desmond never apologized, and honestly, I've stopped waiting for it. I think about my father's line the most. I trusted her with a test, and some nights I still don't know if I feel proud of him for outsmarting her, or sad that a man who deserved real love spent his last 2 years settling for a woman who was only ever counting what he was worth. Maybe both things are true at once. Maybe that's what grief actually is. I kept his reading glasses, tape on the hinge and all. They sit on my desk right now, and every time I catch myself reaching for the 50% she demanded and feeling nothing but tired, I remind myself that some inheritances aren't about money at all. They're about finally being told the truth by the one person who could never say it to your face while he was alive. So, here's my question for you. If your parent had built a hidden test like that, quietly, for years, without telling you a single word, would you call that love? Or would you call that manipulation? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story kept you up wondering what you would have done in my place, hit like, subscribe, and come back tomorrow. Because tomorrow I'm telling you about the wedding day my sister tried to erase me from our mother's will in front of 300 guests. And trust me, that one gets so much worse before it gets better.